Nevertheless, let us start with our panel discussion on strategies for toxic-free products. I think the task we have ahead of us is significant. We have been confronted with quite a number of things which don't work necessarily that well, a shopping list of ideas of things which ideally should happen. And the question will be how to put all the pieces together and make this something workable.
And recognizing, when looking back, REACH is there, brought a lot of improvement, but there are still areas where we need to look further to make things work better. And in the 7th EAP program, these areas for further work exactly have been identified. And these are, we have heard a couple of them already this morning, nano-materials, endocrine disruptors, mixture or cocktail effects of multiple exposure to chemicals, and among them also chemicals in products are mentioned in the 7th EAP. And this is exactly the topic of your conference today.
The companies are moving forward. Many companies are moving quite rapidly now with phasing out their hazardous substances, replacing them through substitution with hopefully non-hazardous, but at least significantly less hazardous substances. Greenpeace is running a detox campaign now in the textile industry. We've got about, I guess, 18 definitive. There are more, but I can safely say 18 name brand companies that are committed to phasing out all their hazardous substances throughout their supply chain by 2020. So the companies are moving rapidly on this as well, and it's time to get the regulation in convergence with this. Member states are moving. We hear about Denmark with some of their initiatives on the tattoo inks, for example, and not being able to move forward because in potential conflict with other rules. So we're running into some real difficulties if we don't move forward on an EU-wide approach.
But there is a lack of a general approach for consumer articles. What we have in EU today, we have the Eco-Design Directive for energy-related articles. And there has been a discussion for a while to enlarge the scope of that directive to cover all articles. In the Eco-Design Directive, there are mechanisms in place today to in principle, do an inventory of all relevant environmental aspects or endpoints, including chemicals. We don't think it is working that well today, especially the life cycle assessment method are not, from our point of view, satisfactory when it comes to chemicals. But there is an opportunity.
We agree with the Commission that REACH is, of course, the core of the regulation of chemicals, but how about the products? Well, what we find works about the regulation on chemicals is if you go on substance by substance, well, that works, but it really takes some time. And then we have the substances of very high concern. There's this list where the producer needs a special permission for marketing or use, but it only covers the EU-produced articles. So, and not the imported, and far most of the consumer products are imported from outside EU. So we find that there is a need for instruments or tools to handle this, the risk from chemicals in consumer articles. I hope that when the Commission starts to work with this 7th EAP, that they will call in all the stakeholders, because there are really a lot of things to be discussed in this area. And they also need some really dedicated people to solve all these problems we've heard about today.
our goal until 2020, and that's in line with what Greenpeace is also asking from the industry, is to renounce for harmful substances in our products and also in our supply chain. And one of our focuses is on per- and polyfluorinated compounds, where we completely would renounce for. And that's the key technology to ensure weather protection in auto products. So that's something very tricky. REACH as such is in its existing form not suitable for the auto industry. Why is that the case? As I said already, textiles are mostly imported and not covered by REACH, and REACH regulates only minority of chemicals which are relevant for us. We saw previously a list of almost 2,000 chemicals relevant for the textile industry, and within the zero discharge of Hazardous chemicals group, we are discussing more than 4,000 chemicals which are relevant for us. And REACH is simply too slow. We're discussing PFOA right now as a single substance, but the industry in Germany already decided to renounce for PFCs as a group as such completely. So what we need to have in future is kind of convergence between reality in parts of the industry, be it textile or auto industry, and a horizontal regulation which really deserves the name of regulation, because right now it's simply irrelevant for us. Thank you.
I fully agree with my neighbor. It works at the pace of a snail. Also the SVHC eliminations. If we look at how many substances have found their way into the Annex 14 after so many years after REACH has been adopted, and it's actually the same pace as we have for the restrictions. So it's very difficult to see that this is an instrument that brings us any further, unless we say that we are trying to make it this non-toxic environment in 100 years. Then it's of course maybe the instrument. One thing I want to say very clearly already now to the Commission: if the Commission interprets the 7th environmental program in a way that this means REACH refinement, then we are going from the onset in the wrong direction. But then we have from the onset a severe problem. So I think that we should actually not exclude the important developments from the onset. We should have an open discussion. We should actually address all these problems in an open way, having all the necessary consultations that are required, and then develop a specific strategy for addressing chemicals in articles. The horizontal framework is also a concept that is quite appealing to us. The question is, should it be a framework that is actually exclusively devoted to chemicals? That would be then some kind of chemicals in products regulation. The eco-design is, of course, appealing insofar as it is already there, and it already says, take into account all the environmental aspects in the life cycle of a product. The plan was there, as you said. It is already was on the table to broaden the scope of this directive. So, in fact, you would have just add some words, in theory, technically.
I would see this as a standalone regulation, EU-wide, and then with linkages to the other relevant legislation like REACH, as I mentioned before. And so, as a standalone legislation, it probably would go co-decision through the full legislative process for chemicals in products. But again, this is more for the absolute qualitative priorities, the SVHCs, right? And then for others that other chemicals of concern that don't meet the criteria, those could be addressed within the sector specific legislation, because it's going to be very much a restriction type approach based on the type of use, the type of materials involved, and so on. But at least we would be able to take all SVHCs, all the CMRs, the PBTs, the endocrine disrupting chemicals, and phase them out of all of our products.
And this is what, in our view, justifies that REACH is a sort of horizontal umbrella under above the specific sector legislation that in your cheese would already be capable of filling some holes. We are not saying there are no holes at all in the end, but starting from this, of course, now we need to think about how exactly this would play in the considerations, how chemicals in products are being addressed and to what extent. But all this would already be a starting point and considerations to take into account for the development of the non-toxic environment strategy.
When I look at the cosmetics regulation, which says CMR are banned, whether or not the substance is now identified. So if the ban of CMR applies, irrespective of whatever REACH has identified or not has identified. In that sense, I would think that the solution to this problem on the product side is the ban of CMR. This can be applied across the board. I don't need this identification. The important thing in the strategy is always to ask the question, what is the benefit of doing something? And to identify SVHC substances take many decades of years. When we can have the same thing with the CMR ban, this is, for me, a bit questionable.
Why does it take so long to get the CMRs on the SVHC list? If they are already known or classified CMRs, I mean, I would have assumed this is a question of one procedure to put them all on that list, the 700 something. Why did that never happen? What did stop you in REACH not doing it?
This was, of course, one of the possible scenarios, and then again policy discussion happened. So in the end, it was decided we don't go this way, that we automatically include all CMRs in the candidate list and identify them as the SVHC.
Yeah, by SVHCs, you're right. Legally speaking, it's only an SVHC when it's gone onto the candidate list. What I'm talking about are substances that meet the SVHC criteria, right? All those substances. The law, the regulation can be very simple. They are to be phased out in 10 years.
10 years and you're done with all SVHCs?
Well, we won't have 10 years. 2020,
Faster.
yeah, definitely.
Faster 5 years.
The aim has to
7.
be that we are faster than 10 years, and I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think it is extremely helpful what companies like Jack Wolfskin do. They can take the lead for some time, but if regulation doesn't catch up, then they will end up with a big disadvantage. This is innovation policy and not preventing regulation for the sake of non-innovation.
I think we saw today that the chemical regulation has some holes. We also heard that there's a big will to fill these holes, so we should fill them and make cheese a little bit more complete.
At the beginning of the day, I explained the aim of the conference was to identify concrete options for regulatory action in the areas where gaps exist, where the cheese is still very holy. I believe we've succeeded in our goal to advance this debate with some important recommendations coming from this meeting. After careful consideration of the work carried out here today, ANEC and the ASI Consumer Council will publish a joint declaration, as Franz referred to, on our recommendations to the European Commission. And here I apologise, I don't actually have a slide that I can put up, but I have 8 recommendations that I will run through for you. It will send a signal to the relevant commissioners to, number 1, establish a platform to elaborate a strategy to address chemicals in products in a comprehensive manner. And this is particularly taking account of articles, as we've heard throughout the day. Secondly, to explore opportunities for enhancing the legal framework for chemicals in products, including the establishment of a horizontal framework. Thirdly, to identify major gaps and how they can be closed in priority areas. And I think we've made a very good start on that here today. Fourthly, to strengthen chemical provisions in existing product regulations, for example, for toys and food contact products, materials. Fifthly, to consider the implementation of new regulations for chemicals in products in priority areas, such as the child use and care articles, products releasing substances into indoor air, water supply materials, textiles, and that very special area of tattoos and colorants. Sixthly, consider specific provisions for nano-materials in product regulations. Seventh, to ensure that proper declaration and registration requirements, particularly for nanochemicals in products, are in place to provide for full transparency. And finally, number 8, to review and reinforce monitoring and market surveillance practices. Trust was mentioned several times during today, and it is absolutely vital if we're going to keep, maintain and build consumer trust that we have good and effective market surveillance and monitoring. We believe these actions will strongly contribute to the laudable overall aim set by the European Union to achieve a non-toxic environment as soon as practicable, as stated in the 7th Environmental Action Plan agreed by the European Union institutions and adopted by the European Parliament last week. So may I end by wishing you a safe journey home. I hope without the disruptive winds that have been with us right across Europe for the last 2 days, but perhaps with a future wind of change, such that the results of our recommendations are implemented and taken forward. So thank you all very much and safe journey home.